Okay. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Knopf, we had an agenda item, but I think we'll just ask for public comments for folks who did not previously comment who want to say anything. Do we, ladies, do we have any blue? We have no blue slips. Anyone in the audience like to speak to the council on matters not previously discussed? Seeing no one else. Ms. Miller, you're rising to your feet to give us a detailed legal analysis of this. Ms. Miller. Mr. Natoli.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
But just on that, on the last point that Eric was talking about, because we did talk in the analysis, and I think he kind of drilled down to it a bit, and I appreciate the back and forth with the chair on that. But as we go into this discussion about the regulations and what it might entail, not just from the levies, because, and it's not arguing about whether law is a law, but if in fact that's anywhere accurate, then I'd like to sort through that, because that is the cost of putting regulations. And again, when we talk about streamlining, it's kind of like a person talking out of both sides of their mouth, because in one hand, we're going to make these things better, we're going to, be the coordinating, and then you're adding, maybe not time, but you're certainly adding costs, and that's relevant. I'd like to have a little broader discussion of that. So I guess I turn to Chris, and I want to make sure I understand it correctly, because I appreciated the back and forth here, but it certainly put a finer point on the presentation we had this morning, and I heard that built into it in my own reading of it. I didn't necessarily draw that from that, but if that's the potential implications, and it may be circumstantial and not generally applicable, I need, as one member of this council, I want to have a little more information behind that. So if you're able to sort through that beyond just the analysis got in behind this application for administrative regulations, I'd like to know about that, because it's counterintuitive, or it's counter to what we say we want to in fact do. If those costs are that extreme, and again, maybe I misunderstood a piece of this here, but this last back and forth piqued my interest.
Well, I think it'll pique everybody's interest now to pay a little more attention to the analysis, which, granted, that we gave you earlier on today was broad brushed.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about the categories we wanted to lay out, what the regulatory process was.
Right.
I think a little of what was said from all the parties, at least in my view, resonate. But I think it's important to keep in mind that over the course of the last 2 years that you've gone through, 7 drafts of the Delta Plan, you as a council have really refined the regulatory policies from what they started out to be. And you really, you've been very sensitive to local agencies, stakeholders, dealing with costs. You've refined what a covered action is. You've added administrative exemptions that really take off the table, things like ministerial actions, things that are exempt from CEQA so long as they don't have a big significant impact. So I think you're right. It's important to focus in on the fiscal and economic impact analysis of what your proposed regulations are, just like you would with any other regulations. But Phil has a really good point in that the legislature told this council to put together a legally enforceable plan to really accomplish certain objectives, the co-equal goals. And I think to your benefit, what you've done as a body is, you've taken a hybrid approach and you've really refined it to try to do the job while still being sensitive to local area interests. So I think it's a balancing approach, and I think as a staff we will provide more information to give you better context before you make a decision.
Well, and I appreciate that, but again, when I hear just what Eric's put forward, because again, I heard those numbers this morning, but then I hear it can add to the cost not just 200%, double it. It could be 800%. Now, again, that may be somebody's take on it, but certainly that's the type of thing where that's like government run amok. I mean, I get that. All different quarters.
Yeah, I don't personally. I don't see it as government run amok because I think the theory is that once you set out a unified state direction for state and local agency actions in the Delta, that lays the groundwork, the yardstick by which people will know ahead of time while they're designing their projects what they have to be. So it's not so much the case where you have a project that all of a sudden has to be drastically altered and costs added It's more, you know what the unified plan is. You know ahead of time when you're designing your project what it's going to take to be consistent with the Delta plan. So yeah, there are costs of certifying with the council, your consistency with the plan. There could be costs of building in alterations to your project, but once once the plan's been in effect for a while, everybody knows what the rules are, and project design will take that into account. So, I can understand that there will be costs. I think Steve Hatchett's point when he presented earlier was, in some cases, it's hard to quantify the exact nature of the costs because we don't know what the covered actions are going to be that come to us. And he tried to give some representative examples, which I thought he did a good job of. So it's going to be different. But again, you've done a really good job of trying to narrow the scope of what covered actions will be, so it isn't just government run amok. Not that it was in the first instance, but I think that you've gotten to a place where you've got a real good balance.
Well, and just when I would like to, just as it relates to flood protection project, which I know can get very involved, and it's a moving target. Sitting on bodies that provide for that protection. Again, when I wear other hats, is that sometimes it almost seems like it's endless, and it doesn't necessarily all relate to regulations, but it's changing rules. It's rules that evolve, and you set a certain playing field out there, and if you stay within that context and this level, okay, but when that playing field or the goal line keeps moving and moving, and meanwhile the costs accrue, they accrue to the taxpayers, to the ratepayers, to whoever, and it may not be a function of anything that this council necessarily has any control over, but I can just tell you that gets to be a burden of itself, and then if it gets layered on, and again, if that's the law, then you can either change the law or you live with it, or I guess you do nothing. And part of what we hear, though, is things don't get done because there's so much of this either changing playing field and or people can't make up their minds at whatever level. And so, again, it really piqued my interest, though, in hearing this last exchange, and again, certainly respecting both Eric and the chair's comments. I just want to know a little bit more. Again, some of it may be theoretical because you don't know for certain, and I appreciate that, Chris. I think that was evident this morning. But some of these numbers and then the implications, if you drill down through it, even with things this council's done to try to narrow that, I guess I kind of want to know that before we actually get to the point where we're going to pass on this. So,
well, last commenter's point, I think, has piqued all of our interest.
Okay.
So I'd like a little opportunity to dig into that a little bit and try and cover exactly what he's getting at.
I think one of the other things to keep in mind is the way the coordination process works. Because part of what we ought to be coordinating is bringing different funding streams to bear, and issues of levies is a really good one, because one of the reasons that was a cost that we could begin to quantify is we already had some estimates of what it would cost to build the urban levee systems in the deltas. So then we could think about, okay, what would it cost to set back some of those levees if it turned out to be feasible, and so we could put together a cost estimate better than we could do in other areas. And so certainly there is if you have to analyze whether it's feasible to set back a levee, there is an analytical cost that will come with the project planning. But then if it's feasible, it's a question of can you do that in a reasonable period of time, taking into account technical, social, and economic factors. So these plans, if we do it all right, they're going to be compatible. The DDCP will dock into the Delta plan. If it, as now does, calls for setting back levees along certain miles of channel to rehabilitate channel habitat, the fact that now my project costs 800% more than it would have because I'm going to set back a levee, and so that's going to cost more, is also going to make you eligible for funding through those restoration elements to DDCP carry out that project. Otherwise, it wouldn't be feasible and you wouldn't be setting it back. So the coordinating functions can not only smooth regulatory problems, but they can bring additional funding streams to the table, so what might seem like an insurmountable barrier really becomes something that is an asset to your project and use it. That's part of the challenge in thinking about the program. How do we make the pieces work together to really get where we want to go, rather than conclude that it'll always be a barrier.
All right.
Oh, yeah, I'm feeling a whole lot better. And sitting on the Safeco board, I can tell you I feel a lot better about that. No, I appreciate that. You're certainly reasonable what you put forward, but Safeco's a good example where we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and right now we're tied up waiting for folks that are the funders. Not that I believe it will come, the money at some point, but we've gone to the well twice with the ratepayers and the residents, and we're pretty much stalled out until the funding comes from the other sources that are some of the primary funders behind it. Again, it doesn't make it impossible, doesn't say that you shouldn't do things a certain way, but it's just realities, and you know that. You've done work on it on other projects too. So, okay, well, something to ponder over their holiday period.
I look forward to the discussion to come.
This is good. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, members? All right, we'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.